So ever since getting my Fujifilm X-E4 last year, I have been on the hunt to find the perfect everyday lens for that camera. And I think I finally found it. I wanted something that was small, manual, somewhat fast, and somewhere between the 23 to 35 millimeter range. And I typically prefer manual lenses on the Fuji because I use it as my walk around film camera, and that's just way more of a interesting experience to me as opposed to just picking a spot on a screen and focusing there. So the lens in question is the 7artisans 35mm f2 for Leica M mount. I found out about this lens from GX Ace's video, and I pretty much fell in love immediately with the image that it creates and the design of this lens. On the X-E4, this 35mm becomes about a 52mm equivalent, so it's kind of like a nifty 50. Looks wise, this lens is practically a Leica clone, if you will, as it looks like a 35 Summicron, and it has a sonar lens design, which makes for some beautiful images. It is fully metal and has an integrated focus tab onto the actual focus ring, which is so much better than those annoying little peel and stick ones that you get with a lot of other TT Artisans and 7artisan lenses, which I cannot stand those ones. They are so annoying. One unfortunate thing about this lens though is they don't make it anymore. At least they don't make this version anymore. So you will have to look on the used market if you want one, and that can be quite difficult to find. Personally, it took me like 3 months to find one for a good price, which isn't terrible because I wasn't looking too hard, but it's a long time to be looking for a lens. There is a ton to like about this lens, but I think the number one thing that I personally enjoy is just the size of it, because it is just so tiny and compact, and it fits perfectly on the X-E4, which is already a very small camera, and it doesn't make it too front heavy, which I love it. One seemingly minor thing that I really do enjoy about this lens is that the aperture has click stops. Most of the 7artisans lenses that I've messed with have declicked apertures, which is fantastic for video shooters, but for a lens that I am strictly using for photos, I would much prefer having clicked stops. With those other lenses, I found myself constantly bumping the aperture unknowingly and shifting my exposure and shifting my depth of field, and it just drove me nuts. Oh, also the image quality of this lens is fantastic in case you're wondering, so don't have to worry about that. It is sharp and detailed, but it's not like overly crazy Sigma detailed sharp where it just looks digital and not fun, I guess. Especially since I use this lens with the Fuji with film simulation, so I'm not going for a super clinical look to begin with. I'm going for more of a fun, stylized look, which this lens does great. I do keep a Tiffen Glimmerglass 1 filter on this lens at all times when I use it, because I just love a little bit of a glow to the highlights. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the example photos, but I use that filter on any lens that I throw on the Fuji. Like I mentioned before, the built-in focus tab is an absolute joy to use, and it is super comfortable, so that's a huge plus. And the last thing that I like about this lens, which might seem a little dumb, is I just like the design of it. Like, it just looks good. It doesn't make the lens perform any differently, and it shouldn't matter, but it really matters to me when I have to look at it all day. I am such a sucker for a clean looking camera setup, and with this lens on the front of the X-E4, it looks so clean. To be honest, there's not a whole lot that I don't like about this lens, but the number one thing that comes to mind is probably the minimum focus distance. And this isn't necessarily such a fault with the lens as so much as it seems to be a fault with the mount that this lens is, because every Leica M mount lens that I have tried has pretty poor minimum focus distance. And also, if I haven't mentioned this before, this is a Leica M mount lens, which means you will have to adapt it to Fuji X, but there are a plethora of adapters that you can get for like $10 to $20 that you can slap any Leica M mount lens you want onto your Fuji. There is an adapter that has its own helicoid that I've seen for Leica M to Fuji X, which will improve the minimum focus distance drastically, but I don't want to really be dealing with 2 focus rings. And I guarantee you I'm going to bump one of them and then not bump the other one, and that's going to be really annoying. So I'm just going to live with the poor minimum focus distance because I don't really focus on things that are that close anyway. And if I absolutely need to, the X-E4 is 26 megapixels, so I can just crop a little bit. If you do need that closer minimum focus distance though, that adapter is a great option. And probably the only other thing that I don't really like about this lens, which again, isn't even a fault of this lens, but it is simply that this lens is so hard to find these days. This lens isn't even very old. It's only a few years old, but since they've discontinued this version of this lens, it is so hard to find, and you have to look on the used market, and there's almost never any for sale. There are only a couple of new copies listed on eBay, and for the most part, they are the silver one, which I'm not really a huge fan of. I want the black one with the yellow markings because it looks fantastic, but also they're typically way more expensive than they were new. This lens was like $290 brand new, and now on eBay, it seems like they're like $350 to $400 or even more. There is a newer version of this lens that you can buy for that same $290 price tag, but in my honest opinion, it kind of looks like shit. And I know the physical appearance of the lens doesn't matter whatsoever, but it does matter to me on the Fuji. Also, don't quote me on this, but they may have changed the optical design of the new version as opposed to this version. It also looks a bit chunkier. So if you want this sleek, older version, you gotta find it used. This lens is almost perfect for what I was looking for on my X-E4. I think the only thing personally that I would change about this lens is I wish at times that it was a 28mm f2 as opposed to the 35, because I feel a little bit wider field of view would be better for a day-to-day scenario. 28mm would be about 40mm equivalent on the X-E4, which would be perfect for every day. Unfortunately, the only 28mm f2 lens that I can find that appeals to me is the Leica Summicron, and I don't know about you, but I can't afford that right now. So what is your favorite lens for Fujifilm? Let me know down in the comments. I am super interested to hear what you guys have to say, and I might just have to try a few of those out myself because I am always hunting for new exciting lenses that I can try out. Anyway, that is gonna do it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing, as it really does help this channel out. And I will see you in the next one.